So how does the system really work? You know, we economic hitmen have many vehicles to make this happen, but perhaps the most common one is that we will identify a country, usually a developing country, that has resources we covet, our corporations covet, like oil. And then we arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. Now, most everybody in our country believes that that loan is going to help poor people. It isn't. Most of the money never goes to the country. In fact, it goes to our own corporations. It goes to the Bechtels and the Halliburtons and the ones we all hear about, usually led by engineering firms, but a lot of other companies are brought in. And they make fortunes off building big infrastructure projects in that country. Power plants, industrial parks, ports, those types of things. Things that don't benefit the poor people at all. They're not connected to the electrical grid. They don't get the jobs in the industrial parks because they're not educated enough. But they, as a class, are left holding a huge debt. The country goes deep into debt in order to make this happen. And a few of its wealthy people get very rich in the process. They own the big industries that do benefit from the ports and the highways and the industrial parks and the electricity. The country's left holding this huge debt that it can't possibly repay. So at some point, we economic hitmen go back in and we say, you know, you can't pay your debts. You owe us a pound of flesh. You owe us a big favor. So sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies, or vote with us on the next critical United Nations vote, or send troops in support of ours to someplace in the world like Iraq. And so we use this whole process as, first of all, getting their money, basically, money we loan them, to enrich our own corporations, and then to use the debt to enslave them, to imprison them, to get them to have to agree to selling off their resources cheap. It's an amazing system, and in the process of doing that, we have, in essence, created this empire. And we've done it without the military, without most citizens knowing that it ever happened. In fact, most citizens believing we've done a great thing. We've spent billions of dollars on building an electrical system, industrial parks, and so on and so forth. We've given this country a huge gift. And the truth of the matter is exactly the opposite of that. We've given this country, we've put this country in a terrible, terrible situation, a terrible predicament. A few of its wealthy people have made a lot of money, and they've invested in real estate in Florida or Swiss banks or stock markets overseas. They've taken their money out of the country, and they've become very rich. And if something goes wrong in the country, they just leave. But the other people are left holding this huge debt, and as a result, they can't afford the education systems, the water and sewage systems that they need, the health care, and all the other civil amenities that they need. And of course, that in turn feeds the whole system, so we can go back in later and offer another loan to privatize their education system or to develop their sanitation system, and the process is repeated and repeated and repeated, and it just keeps going on. It's very effective. It's a very effective way of building an empire. It's very unfortunate that most people, certainly in America and I think many other places, feel that foreign aid is foreign aid, that it's altruistic, that it helps these countries, and it almost never does. There are some exceptions. After a tsunami or a great natural disaster, immediately some foreign aid goes in to put up tents and bring in food and water and so forth. But very soon after that, that gets corrupted too, and you start using that to build big hotels that are owned by the big international chains and restaurants and so on, not helping the mom and pop organizations. But we don't hear that. We think foreign aid is altruistic, that it's there to help people. In fact, it's only there to help the corporatocracy. Yeah, that's what it's for. That's how the system is set up. I think that's terribly unfortunate. I'd like to see foreign aid really work that way. You know, we could do some really good things with that. Or even better, just leave people alone. I find it fascinating that as I travel around Latin America, I speak Spanish, I've spent a lot of time there, what I'm hearing from the leaders there is not that they're looking for us for any kind of help at all. This whole new genre of leaders that is emerging is simply saying, let us use our own resources to pull our people up by their bootstraps. We can do it. Just don't steal our resources anymore. When someone like me is sent into a country to justify a loan, for example, one to develop a power system, we develop these 20, 25-year economic forecasts that show that if we invest this money into the electric system, then the economy is going to take off. That's all that's needed. And we inflate these tremendously, hugely inflated forecasts. And these are not realistic by any means, and the people making the forecasts know they're not realistic. Tremendous pressure is put upon us. Tremendous pressure was put upon me to make these forecasts higher and higher and higher to justify more and more loans. So the economic forecasts are developed to justify loans, not to present any picture of reality. Modern econometrics and mathematical modeling of economies makes it quite easy to do this. You can change the statistics in such a way or massage them in such a way that they'll show you basically anything you want them to. I can share a personal experience about how we tweak economic forecasts, how we skew them. Certainly, I knew that's what I was supposed to do. My bosses at my company put a tremendous amount of pressure on me to do these things. And this pressure it's quite easy. I talk in one of my books about how the person who, my predecessor, was retiring, and he was determined to be integritous and not tweak the forecasts. So he was fired, and I was given his job with the clear understanding. I knew why he was fired, and I knew that if I wanted to progress in this company, I would tweak the forecasts. And when I later hired other people, and I ended up having several dozen very highly skilled economists and financial experts working for me, they all knew that their bonuses, their raises, everything depended on going along with this system. Now, when we take these forecasts to the World Bank or the Inter-American Development Bank or the Asian Development Bank or any of these other organizations, there are people in that organization that are supposed to catch this. If we're being non-integritous, if we're tweaking forecasts, there are specialists there that are supposed to review this. And my experience was that some of these guys really are integritous. They wanted to punch holes in my forecast. And I would often have to stand before a board or a committee at the banks and defend my forecast, and they would pick holes in them. Some of these people who were quite junior really saw through what I was doing. But I always knew that above those people, their bosses knew exactly what was going on, and they were determined that the country that I was doing this forecast for was going to get that loan, that this was going to move forward. So it was a charade. But sometimes we would spend several months before these committees justifying, arguing, debating, and going back and tweaking some more and writing more reports. And it was almost like appearing before a court of law. You know, it was like two lawyers opposing each other, and we'd have our teams and we would set them up. So within the bank itself, there were experts, there were econometricians, economists who were quite integritous, and they saw through what we were doing, but they never won, ultimately, because their bosses were on my side. Although it was never that obvious, but we always won, ultimately. This isn't a mistake when these things that happen of building debt in these countries that can't repay it is not a mistake. It's a policy. It's well known. Everybody knows it's going on. And I do want to make it very clear that within organizations like the World Bank and many of these corporations, there's some very, very good people and conscientious people and hardworking people. And it can be easy for them to convince themselves that they're doing a good thing. I found it easy to convince myself. And what I did was not illegal as an economic hitman. It should be illegal, but it isn't. You know, if I were to lend somebody, if I'm a banker and I lend somebody a lot of money knowing they can't repay it because I want to get a favor from them later, that's illegal. But when I do it on a national level or through the World Bank, it's not illegal. And I knew, as a lot of these other people do, deep in my heart, that what I was doing was wrong, but it's so easy to justify because it's taught in our business schools, it's taught in our law schools that this is the way to make development happen. Investing in infrastructure is the way to make development happen. And the statistics can show that it works. They can show that gross national product, that the overall economy improves. But the fact is that in most of these countries, only a very few people benefit from the overall economy. Everybody else is outside that economy. They're living subsistence lives, or they're living lives that basically aren't part of that economy. And so it's easy for people at the World Bank or others to look at what they're doing and say, ah, this is a good thing. It's easy for people at Nike, for example, to say these sweatshops in Indonesia are making people's lives better, even though if they really go over there and look at the people, they know their lives are getting worse. But they can say, well, we're going to improve. There's always that thing that's held out, that we can do it better, that we're doing something good. But deep in our hearts, anybody who's really looking at this, anybody that really watches what's going on, deep in that person's heart, as in mine, we know it's wrong. And yet, the other aspect is that we're living a good life. I get paid a good salary. These people at the bank, at the World Bank, at Nike, everywhere else, they're getting good salaries. They're able to give their kids good educations. Their families are happy with the materialism and so forth. So you've got these two factors working. They're prospering, and philosophically, they can justify it. I was invited to speak at Harvard and other schools about what I was doing, and I was patted on the back for this. So it's easy to justify it, but when you really look beneath the surface, you know that what you're doing is wrong. And I think therein lies part of the solution, because human beings really want to take care of the future and future generations, I think, deep in their hearts. And so if we force people to really see that what we're doing is wrong and ultimately destructive for our progeny, then we will be able to get people to change. And recently, there's been a lot of talk about debt forgiveness. 18 countries were singled out as ones that were in line to have their debt forgiven. I wish that would happen. I'm totally for debt forgiveness, but it has to be unconditional. And unfortunately, none of this is unconditional. So what it turns out is this round of debt forgiveness that's been proposed is an incredible subterfuge. It's one of the best economic hitman tricks I've heard to date. So that each one of these 18 countries then will have to agree to conditionalities that benefit the corporatocracy. Things like privatizing. That's a big one, that they have to privatize. And another one is that they will not be able to ship out products or raw materials that threaten ours, such as some agricultural goods, that they will have to accept restrictions on what they can sell to the United States and the G8 countries. And on the other hand, they will have to accept our restrictions. And so it's this very, very rigged system. And the world hears, oh, debt forgiveness. And celebrities go out and talk about debt forgiveness, and they're being exploited too. And we all say, oh, isn't it wonderful? We're being so generous. We're going to forgive all this debt. We've given all these countries all this money. Now we're going to tell them they don't have to pay it back. The fact of the matter is, we've asked for something much worse. They would be so much better off never to have had the debt, of course, or to just pay it off.